Let's explore some of the tools within Modo. Now, one thing that I should mention is that, at the end of the day, I mean, I can go over these tools briefly, and, it's not really going to matter much because in the end, you guys really should know what the tools do, and the only way to really know is by simply going to, for example, these tools here. If it says vertex, then you have to obviously use the vertex selection. So I would have to select something and perhaps use bevel or extrude and or merge tool, or I just keep clicking until they merged. So what you do is you really have to, just test these tools out and learn what it is that they do. Just get comfortable with using the tools. Try some of the options out. I mean, sometimes it's not as clear as other times, but again, using some of these tools will obviously aid you in understanding how Modo works, which is really important because, I mean, in the end, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to learn, the tools, right? So, the more time you actually spend learning them, the better. Try to see what, for example, slide does if you don't have anything selected. Try to have something selected in your slide. It's just try these tools out. Bridge, for example, especially if you look at the icons, you'll notice that every single one of these is applied to a cube, but here's two cubes. So what if I do something like clone this object once or twice, do something like that, and then try to replicate the picture, right? So I might select these two polygons and use the bridge button. And then what if I add more segments? Well, I could also do that using left click, right? So I can hold left click and I can go left and right. I can add a twist to this, and so on. But anyways, I guess what I'm saying is try to definitely use a number of these tools on your own, especially the ones that won't be covering in here, and just try to learn more about the way things work. If you're having problems with anything, there's always the Luxology forum or even my forum. I can always lend you a hand. But anyways, let's go into a few of the tools. The things that we're going to be using is we're going to be using the transform tools, and I'm specifically going to go into these three. This one is kind of like a jack of all trades, but there's a lot of these handles cover so much space, here that it's just sometimes I don't know, I don't like it, to be honest. I prefer to just be focused, and if I want to switch from move to scale, I can easily press a button on my keyboard, and then I have a focused handle, and I personally find that better. So anyways, yeah, so basically if you press this button here, or if you press W on your keyboard, and one thing you'll notice is that the move tool can actually be activated or turned off by pressing W, which is nice. So yeah, so basically, I'm just turning on and off my move tool, and these handles, what they'll do is they will constrain your movement towards one axis. Here you'll notice on the grid, you'll notice plus X, so that's the positive X, and of course that's where the handle is pointing towards. If I rotate this way, you'll notice a positive Z, and of course the positive Z is pointing in that direction, so I can move things along Z here. And the Y grid is obviously not visible, but I can move things along the Y as well. Now these right now are, the handles right now are aligned to the world space. You probably should have seen the Action Center video by now. If you haven't, then if I go to the Action Center and I go to the axis, I can actually realign these axes to any element that I want. And here, for example, you'll see that my Z is now not pointing along the Z axis. It's actually pointing along the Z or of the normal of this edge. So I can move things along that axis now. But I'm not really going to go into action centers in this video. But anyways, I just wanted to point that out. Of course, these handles also come with, this handle here where you can rotate the axis to whatever you want, and and then you can translate it on a completely arbitrary angle. And of course, you have these planes. Now, these planes right now are locked to, like for example, this this blue circle here. makes sure that you're not moving the object along the Z. This makes sure that you're not moving along the Y, and this makes sure that you're not moving along the X, right? So basically, this circle makes sure that you're locked to the Y and Z, this Y and X, and this one Z and X. So sometimes it's easier to see it if you have a work plane visible, but in this case, it's not really needed because of the fact that these planes are clearly visible and they can actually be oriented outside of the work plane. Now, if you click anywhere outside of the handles, you'll notice that I can still move my object just fine. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the move tool. I don't think there's really anything else that I should mention except that in the transform you can move things either by just clicking on these arrows here, like that, or if I press and hold Control on my keyboard, and then I left click, you'll notice that the numbers that are changing are a lot smaller. So if I don't press Control, you'll notice that my numbers are changing nice and fast. I have like 23 centimeters, 1 meter, na. But if of course I press Control and left click on these arrows here, and I just keep moving, you'll notice that the values are changing much, much slower. Now, you're not really seeing much of a change here, but if you're trying to align two objects that are really, really close, and then I press Control and left click here, you'll notice that the object is moving by a very small amount. So it's very useful for aligning things up. And of course you can do things like, you can type in whatever you want in here, but at the same time, I can if I click on any one of these icons, I can make sure that if I move one of these, that everything's being moved equally. There's other modes where, for example, this one here, let's just say I have something like that. You'll notice that things are moving more or less, proportionally. So let's move over to the rotate handle. Very simple. It's very much like the move handle. The hotkey for this one is E. And you can rotate on X, and of course you can notice if you go to the tool properties, you'll notice that if I click on X, only X is changing, or only Z is changing, or only Y is changing. Now there's another circle here, and it's this one here, the yellow one, or the gray one that turns yellow when you go over it. And this one, you'll notice that all axes are rotating. And that's because what's happening is that this circle on the outside, what it does is it rotates along the objects. Well, it's not the objects. Basically, it rotates the object in screen space. So if I orient my camera like this, or my point of view, then you'll notice that I'm actually rotating the object almost right along Z. It's not exactly it, but I mean, if I go to a different viewport, like one of these, and I use this, then it's really no different than me actually going for this axis here, because my view is perfectly aligned. So yeah, so basically that's that for that rotate. And then you have scale. Scale, very self-explanatory, very much like move tool. You can scale things along any one axis that you want. You can, if you're in automatic mode, you can position your scale to whatever you want, and you can scale from there. The other thing I should mention is that the way the scale planes work, or the non-uniform scale, the center circle actually scales uniformly, which is great if you have a prop and you have that's made out of multiple objects. You basically just select all the objects, and then what I would normally do is I would go to Action Center Origin, and then I would scale everything towards the origin so that you know that for a fact this object is perfectly scaled. What else? Well, the other thing about scale is that, and this is more useful for things like UVing, or actually not even that, but let's just say if I want to flatten something out, I got something like this, and I want to flatten this out nicely. Well, what I could do is I could easily just press scale. I could turn off negative scale, and then you'll notice that I could very easily almost snap things into place. like that. So I once again have a rectangle here. So, I mean, that's pretty much it for scale. There's, again, like, there's another handle here that I could use. This one does scaling, it does rotation, and movement. So it is very handy if you want everything accessible to you. But again, the main problem is that it's just way too busy. I personally don't like it, but you guys can use it all you want. It's perfectly fine. In terms of the scale button, I don't think there's really anything else that I wanted to go over, because I mean, I'm not going to be using anything else. So I guess the next thing would be for me to go over the only one snap tool that I'm actually going to be using. Now, again, the snap and fall off and work plane, I'm actually going to be going over in a completely different video series, just because, again, there's a lot of ways that snapping can be used. There's a lot to the fall off. Granted, I like to keep fall off fairly simple, so I'll mostly be using these, just a few of these. And symmetry often, it's not 100% perfect, but I'll be using it on a completely different model than the ones in this series. So in this series, I'll mostly be covering the action centers, the selection tools. Well, I mean, you've probably watched those videos already, the toolbar, and a bunch of other interface items, but I'm going to be limiting it to that. So basically, as far as snaps and precision, if I have multiple objects and I want to align them up, what I could do is I could just go to snaps and precision, drag snap rigid, and then what you do is you just choose a vertex or edge or whatever, and then you snap it to the next object. And of course I could continue doing that, so all I do is I just go back to drag snap rigid, or maybe it's already active. As you can see, it's always active, so I could just keep dragging objects like that and just snap things in. So it's fairly useful. I actually really like it, and it works pretty well. Drag snap is really no different than drag snap rigid, except that it actually allows you to change the geometry, like so. But I generally like to use drag snap rigid, mostly because if I have multiple pieces that I'm kind of like, let's just say if I have a model and I want to move something away because I want to work on this portion of a model, and then I want to move all of this back, what I would do is I would just use drag snap rigid once again, and I would realign that piece with that, and I'm back to where I started. So that basically covers the transform tools and the one snap tool that I use. And next up, what I'm going to go over is the bevel, extrude, bridge, and etc. So bevel is actually fairly simple. What it does is if I just go into edge mode, select an edge, and I choose bevel, and right now I'm under the basic menu, but if I choose bevel, you'll notice that it will split that edge in two, and it will basically do something like that. It'll give me a nice 45-degree angle corner. Now, that tool actually works in multiple modes. If I go into Vertex and I just select two vertices, you'll notice that there's a bevel tool. The icon looks different than what it did previously. Now, and this is basically what it does right here. Now, the nice thing about the bevel tool is that it also comes with a rounding bevel or rounding level. And of course, I can round it out to whatever I want, and I can get a much smoother and cleaner rounding. So let me just undo that. Edge bevel, same thing. If I go to the edge menu and I just select an edge and I go to bevel, I can get either a 45-degree angle, or I can go into here, round level, and I can increase the number. So basically that's that for the edge bevel. And of course there's a polygon bevel, which actually works more like the extrude tool in other applications. It does a few things. So if I just go and turn on bevel, and then I extrude or use the move handle, you'll notice that it really is no different than an extrude tool. Well, it is and it isn't. One thing that you can do is you can inset with it somewhat. So if I actually don't move anything, I can inset, which is, it's nice. And of course, the other thing that it does is, it either allows me to bevel or extrude things that are connected, so I can extrude that way, or I can just turn off group polygons and it will extrude things separately. Of course, you also have segments, so if I increase these segments over here, you'll notice that I can add whatever amount of segments that I want, and I can just keep extruding, and of course I can inset things in or out. So I think that's it for the bevel tool. Next one that I know that I use just a few times is the bridge tool. So a bridge tool needs more than one model. Well, it doesn't really need more than one model, but it requires two polygons that are separate. So if I just select this polygon and that one over there, and then I choose the polygon bridge, I can bridge things like that. So it'll basically connect those two polygons with new geometry. Now, if I left click on my viewport and move my mouse, you'll notice that I can increase or decrease the amount of segments that are being used to blend between those two polygons. So I can just make it a completely linear connection, or I can left click and drag and make it a much more smoother transition. Now, the thing that changes the amount here is the segments. So I can actually go into the interface over here. I can left click and increase or decrease the value here, or I can just type in whatever number I want. So like, let's just say I want 5, that'll do. Now there's also another function within this tool that deals with the transition. So if I change it from curve to linear, you'll notice that all of a sudden, now the transition is completely linear. Or I can of course make it go to smooth, which changes the transition again. I can do things like flip and reverse direction. And of course, if I use, like let's just say I use something like that, I can change the tension should I want. So you can get a lot of, really neat effects using that tool. It's actually one of my favorites. Okay, so we have the bridge tool covered. We have the bevel covered. Those are the ones that I use very often. The next one is edge extend. So let me just go into edge extend. Let me just find an edge that I could extend. You know what? I'm just going to clear one of the polygons here. If I go ahead and just go into edge selection and I select one of these edges here, and then I could either press the Z hotkey on my keyboard or I could just use the icon here. If I left click in my viewport, I can extend this edge. And then of course I could press the middle click button to repeat the action. So I'm just middle clicking and I'm extending by the same amount that I did previously, as long as the tool is active. So that's basically edge extend, really simple action. There's really not that much to it. Let's see what else do I use. The other thing that I use often is, like, let's just say, for example, that I want to merge two pieces of geometry. So let's just say I have this model here and I want to mirror it over to the other side. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate, mirror. Now there's multiple ways of mirroring, but let's just say I do something like this and I'm not quite, I'm not quite snapping to the center of, basically these two centers. I don't have to be perfectly accurate. What I could do is I could just move things out like that. And then I could do what I mentioned earlier, which is go to basic, snaps and precision, drag snap rigid. I can just pick a vertex, snap the objects together. Now, just because they've been snapped doesn't mean that they are in fact one piece. If I double click on any one of these, you'll notice that they are still separate. But if I go ahead and just select both of these, so what I'm doing is I'm pressing and holding shift, left clicking or left double clicking again, so I've selected the entire object. What I could do now is I could go into vertex, merge tool, and then I can left click and drag to the left just to keep the distance set to 0. And now you'll notice these two, these polygons here disappeared. And now of course what that means is any vertices that have been merged, all the polygons that are connected to it have been they basically disappear. So it's a great way to visually see what's been connected and what hasn't, in case you want to be crystal clear. So that's that tool. The next ones that I'm going to go over are the slice tools. So edge slice is one that's very useful, especially for things like characters, or not even that. I mean, it's useful for just so many different things. But edge slice, you can press the C hotkey to enable it. And of course, what it allows you to do is you can split either edges. As you can see here, I can split edges like that, so I can add detail to exactly where I need it. Or if I just press Q to drop that tool, I can go into edge slice again, and what I can do is I can go inside of a polygon and I can add a bunch of detail like that. Like so. So now what I could do now is, for example, bevel like that. Now, there's a little bit more to edge slice. Usually what I do is I actually turn off inside polygon, and there's a very good reason why. Because if I turn off inside polygon, then I can very easily just make sure that I only split the edges, and I know that I have no dirty geometry going along my model. Now, if I had edge slice turned on and I had inside polygons, and let's just say I want to clean this up, so I click on that edge and I go down to the vertex and I do something like that. But let's just say somewhere along the lines I miss my edge and I have something like this, and then I try to move it over to this edge, and I think it looks as if I've actually split these two edges, and in Modo, in one of the recent Modos, this has been fixed where it actually does. Once you connect it, it's all good. But in previous versions of Modo, I think Force still did this. I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, in the earlier versions of Modo, what would happen is if you did something like this and you moved towards an edge, it actually wouldn't snap that towards that edge. What would happen is you'd have something like that, where you tried connecting, and all of a sudden, well, what's going on? Well, the reason why it's not connecting is because it actually hasn't split this edge, so you're not continuing this edge. You're not continuing the split from here to this edge here, right? So what you'd have to do is you'd have to do something like that, and then connect it back up with that polygon or that edge there. So it creates a bit of a mess. So I generally like to keep the inside polygons turned off, and sometimes you might want to use split in the middle so that you know for a fact that you are splitting exactly at 50% at all times, just in case you're looking for an effect like that. Now the other one that I use very often is loop slice. Loop slice is very useful. What I could do is I could just go to either polygons, and I could select a number of polygons, loop slice. It will loop slice all the way down the middle of an edge, and if I left click and drag in my viewport, I can slide the edge exactly, or the edge loop exactly where I need it, which is very useful. Let's just say I wanted to split something like that, and I just use loop slice. I can drag it to the corners like that. And of course, the other nice thing about loop slice is the fact that what I could do, if I go into the tool, I could move my edges to exactly where I need it, but at the same time, I could just go to count. I can increase that number to 10, so now I have multiple splits. The other great thing is that if you go over here, you can actually move every single one of the edges independently. Like that. So as you can see, I'm moving every single edge independently. Very useful. And of course, every single time you click on any one of these, you'll notice that what happens is, these numbers should technically reset to whatever edge you pick, but yeah. Anyways, so you could change, for example, which edge you're picking here, your current edge, which one is the current one that you're working on, and you'll notice that the position is changing to that edge. So you could choose, for example, that one, and then you could move it, you could make the current one number 5, and you could move number 5 exactly where it is that you need it. Then you could choose current number 6, and you could move it again exactly where you need it, like that. Very useful. I use this tool a lot. So between the edge slice and the loop slice and the bevel tools, and the merge tool, you can actually do a lot with just these tools alone. Now, again, there's slide, which I use very often as well, especially to align things up. Now, generally, I don't use slide as much in Modo as I would in other applications. And of course, the reason for that is because if I use the loop slice like I just did, I can slice and move my edges exactly where I need them. Generally, in other applications like Mirai or other applications, generally what would happen is you would create a new edge loop, and then you would have to select that edge loop and then use the slide function. So slide is a little bit less useful here, mostly because you already can slide things in and out exactly as you want. But let's just say if I wanted to take something like this edge loop here, and I wanted to just slide it down, well, I could very easily do that. Just select the edge loop and just slide it down exactly where you need it. So it's still a useful tool, don't get me wrong. It's just that I don't find myself using it as much as, again, in other applications. So these three tools here in edge mode are very useful. Again, bridge, very useful. And of course, I think I use bend a few times. So bend is very simple. Like, let's just say I make a selection like this, then I go to bend and I put the bend over here. I can bend things like that, or I can of course choose the handle to choose the direction which I want to bend in. I can move this bend to wherever I want. Of course, I could use the bend first, and then I could grab the center and I can move it to exactly where I need it. So yeah, that's fairly neat. And of course, there is the other tool that I use sometimes is the element move tool. Now, the element move tool, you can enable it, or you can just press T to enable it. You use right click to change the radius of what it's going to affect, like that. If I change the radius to something much smaller, you'll notice that I only affect that portion here. If I change it to something much bigger, I'll affect a lot more of the model. There really isn't too much for this tool. Very, very simple. And I think that's all I really wanted to go over in terms of using the tools, mostly because of, again, I want to keep things simple. And I think those are the only tools that I use within, within this particular video set. I guess the only other one that I use is the pen. Pen is very simple. Once again, all I do is I just left click and draw out a polygon, whatever I want, whatever shape I want. And, it's got a number of functions as well. Like, show angles. Right. Anyways, it does have a number of functions that you can use to make things a little bit simpler. You can use a bunch of the snapping tools. So if you turn on snapping, you'll have a bunch of snap options. You can play around with this, but yeah, you can basically, if you just enable snapping, you'll notice that it's got a number of options for when you're drawing new, points. You can snap things to either a right angle, straight line, or world axis, etc. So I'm just going to go to snapping. I'm going to disable snap for now. And I guess the only other option tool that I haven't covered is the Radial Sweep. So if I want to revolve this selection, I could, do it like that. But, I go into that tool in more detail when I actually use it. So I think that's it. You can change your count over here. You can change your start angle and end angle like that. And of course, the only other thing I should really mention is that whenever you're using these tools like Radial Sweep, you really should be in automatic mode. You're going to get a few extra options in how, basically a lot of these tools become a little bit more intuitive. But that's basically it. So that's me just playing around and showing you the tools that I use. So with the next chapters, which are going to deal with the actual modeling process, you're going to see these tools in action. And yeah, cheers. And the last thing I wanted to actually mention before I finish off this video is, especially if you're using the Bevel tool, one thing that I forgot to mention is that, let's just say I go into, well, Polygon or Basic or anywhere, just, select the polygon, use Bevel, extrude outwards, or, just pick the handle. What you'll have here, I'm just going to close this just because my interface is kind of small. But what you have here is under the profile section. So just choose a profile, choose whichever one you like. And what you'll notice is that you can very quickly get stuff like this going on. Now, the nice thing about the profile tool is that you can change these at any given time that you want, as long as the tool is still active. Now, if it ever looks like this, all that means is that you probably have to zoom in. I mean, basically you have to shrink your bevel amount. So again, you can get this kind of stuff really, really quickly within Modo just by choosing bevel, choosing a profile that you want, like that, and there you go. And of course, the nice thing about this is that you can just keep going. I could change the bevel to something like that, and look how fast I've just done that. It's nice and accurate. Looks nice. The only thing I might have to do is just maybe select these edges here. And you know what? I'm just going to press Alt-L. Whoops. I'll choose this. Like that. And I'm just going to bevel these edges. Like that. Maybe with one. And there you go. Nice round corners. Nice beveling. And it was really, really easy to do. So yeah, that's it for the tools. Cheers.